So with that fabulous info, my name is Siren, and welcome to my home. I am going to be talking to you a little bit about security today, a little bit about proactive controls, hopefully less about buzzwords, a little bit about me. If you've never heard me speak before, I would describe myself as a happy security Sisyphus type, which, if you're into philosophy, gives you kind of a sense of how long I've been doing this. I'm a big fan of unicorns, big fan of My Little Pony, so I always have ponies in my slides. As you will see as we're continuing to kind of go through this deck, I have a pretty terrible sense of humor, and I have a huge love of automation. And so today I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit more about a human-centric perspective, because as I was mentioning to Heather earlier, security does not solve technical challenges. Security is a person discipline. It is not a technical discipline. And I think that it is the misunderstanding of those two that is kind of the root cause of why we have so many security problems today. And so the hardest thing that I do every single day, and I've been doing security work for over 12 years now, is I try and find the good in the people I work with, which sounds completely insane, given the quality of the amazing people that I've had the privilege to surround myself with. But given kind of the Sisyphus philosophy joke earlier, I've been doing this for a very long time. And I think that I have been doing it for such a long time that you see the same problems over and over, and you see the same challenges over and over, and it's frustrating. And so the brain begins to try and protect itself because it needs to have a reason for why are you seeing the same type of issues? Why are you having the same conversations over and over? Because it needs a reason, because it needs to put things into perspective. And it can't accept that things just happen. It wants to have a puzzle. It wants to understand. And the idea of there not being something that binds all those things together into some sort of larger evil, that's hard. That becomes something that, what do you do with, if it doesn't matter, if there's not something, some larger foe? Because if there is a larger foe, that's something that we can fight. I will get my sword. I am up on the barricades. It is the red dawn. That is something that we can challenge. That is something we can fight. There is a logical reason that we are still stuck with this boulder, still, having the same conversations over and over. And that's easier because there has to be a larger evil. Because otherwise, what if there's not? What if it is just because of who we are and how we're using the internet and common problems and common failings? And that becomes really, really depressing. And then because, you're screaming into the wilderness. And that's hard because then you're standing there all by yourself. And that's when I really have to remind myself how often I fail and how often I do things wrong, given this talk that was just like awkward 3 minutes of silence. Thank you, people, for not just like yelling through the microphones at me. And in those moments, I have to tell myself that the people around me or watching me awkwardly sit here in silence are aware of the fact that I am a person that is desperately trying to do the right thing and trying to do my best in circumstances that are not ideal, and that they will see me with generosity in that moment, as opposed to, making fun of me in a jerkish way. And that's what I can only tell myself when I remind myself of that failure. However, I can't have kind of this emo picture because my hair is too long to have kind of the emo bangs, and I thankfully outgrew that phase. And I've been doing security for such a long time that I have a very strong idea of what the right thing to do is. It's patching, it's two-factor authentication, it's validation. And I know that I am right because I have had this argument so many times that I've heard all the counter arguments. I have a good point. I am going to win. And the benefit is that I've had the argument so many times that I don't actually have to listen to any of the counterpoints because I've heard them all before. And because I've heard them all before, I don't actually have to listen to the other person. because I'm not actually listening to the other person. I'm waiting for them to say what I'm expecting so that I can then show up with my counter argument, and back and forth we go, because I know that I am technically correct. I have a security bug. I found it. I am technically correct. We have the benefit of industry best practices, OWASP top 10, security, standards, industry, must do's. The bug technically exists. I can prove it. Here's the exploit, whatever the case may be. I am technically correct. And this is easy, to be technically correct, because being technically correct means that I don't have to look at context because I'm technically correct. And I have gotten into a lot of arguments in my career and in my personal life because I'm stubborn and strong-willed. And I've interviewed a lot of candidates. And I would generally say that I know enough to know that I'm basically just winging it. And that we're all basically just winging it. And that I'm pretty cool with that fact. And I'm so cool with it that I'm admitting it on camera, not for the very first time. And because I'm cool with it, but I also know that I'm stubbornly driven about what I do, I've also spent a lot of time figuring out why I love what I do. And I've realized that what I really, really enjoy is being of service. And the benefit of that, and the benefit of my discipline, is that security's privilege is to be a supporting function. Our purpose is to be of service. That being said, if my job is to help protect a parade by building, bumpers along that road, it can be frustrating trying to wave down the 500th parade float where the driver seems to be driving blindfolded or so quickly that they're going to go, wildly off the road. And if I am protecting a parade of 900 alone, it's understandable that I'm really irritated. And this passion combined with my mouth have gotten me in trouble more often than not, because I'm technically correct. But with years of experience and hindsight, I've realized that I can go into any argument or any discussion with anybody with one of two decisions. I can be right, or I could listen. And I have to pick which one is more important to me. It doesn't mean that if I choose to listen to the other person that I'm not correct, but it means that the goal of my conversation with that person is not necessarily to be correct. Because I genuinely believe that security is a supporting function. And therefore, I need to listen to the other person in order to do what I want to do, which is be a supporting function. I may be right, and generally speaking, I usually think I am, but it's not the goal. My goal is context. However, that is not always easy because it is messy, and it is easier to look at it from, taking a step back to technically correct. And this is true for a lot of security challenges because many organizations continue to see security as solely technical in nature. And so we respond by investigating technical controls only. And when we do that, we don't realize the impact of what that actually means, because little in those choices is being done to raise cybersecurity or security awareness or to promote secure behaviors. And generally, people that aren't techie or that don't know how to code are looked down on as buggy or defective or unfixable or wrong or blame the user. And all of those are kind of hidden defense mechanisms of people that are struggling, where indifference is easier. But the impact or the result of those choices is that our over-reliance on technical choices or technical responses to security challenges is that we're having more security breaches caused by the people using the systems rather than less. And even when organizations do choose to try and kind of bring up more cybersecurity or security training programs, these are generally done in a routine tick box compliance-based programs, which don't take into account the people actually using them. And they don't actually take into account how they're going to be used or the impact of what those learning problems might be. And, oops, there we go. Sorry about that. And where many organizations or many kind of, I don't know about you guys, but I have a million vendors call me on my cell phone to, sell me the latest tool that's going to solve all of my problems. And it's always presented that workers, employees, our teammates will absolutely make the right choices only and specifically because it benefits the employers and one another. No other reason is necessary. And this is just generally not the case. We fail to appreciate the impact of cognitive dissonance. And this is when a person is taking an action or making choices where they don't understand why they're doing it. And so there's a diff in your brain between I am doing something that I think is a huge monumental waste of my time. I'm not going to engage in that action. I'm going to do it because I want to get paid. I don't want to get fired, but I'm not going to buy into it. I'm not going to be engaged with it. I'm not going to care about it, really, because I'm being forced to do something that I don't really understand. And the quality of whatever that is will suffer because of that forcing, I guess. And it's not just me kind of saying this in my office kind of oddly by myself. If we're looking at just numbers, there's a study done by Basics where they have realized that 2 of 3 workers don't feel like they have enough time to get their work done, where Gallup did a survey before COVID where people who responded said they have roughly no time to actually do training, and where Gallup realized that about 1% of their week was focused on learning and development. And somehow in that 1% of time, we're going to cram in a training program for security, which is, despite my best efforts to speak at conferences, and I'm definitely not alone in that effort, there is not a lot of good training material around security that takes into account the people actually using it. And then there is 1% a week where 2 to 3 people don't feel, 2 of 3 people don't feel like they have enough time. And this is before COVID, where in COVID, we're all working from home not all of us, a lot of us are working from home, which is new. We may have family members that are sick or family members who are worried. We may have jobs that are suddenly unstable or non-existent. That's a lot to be carrying. And on top of that, we also have to add security training programs and now, working from home security. If, it's understandable if that's all too much. Where a technical control is not going to make COVID go away. There is no tool that I can give to somebody to say, here, take all of that on, you're done. It's not a technical challenge. Because when the internet was created, 1 million years ago at this point, not really, but a long time ago, if we're looking at the writings around the internet, not the internet, at the time, but around internet creation, the people that created the internet thought that the technologies that would be created would protect us. And what we didn't understand at that time was that the vulnerabilities that were created were not due to the technologies that were created, but it was due to how we who are using the internet, you and me and everybody at this conference currently, how we chose to share information was what was and is what's causing those security issues. It is we, the people, not the technology, that created the modern technological space. And it is the modern technological space that leaves us so open to attack. And so every year we see more companies creating more problems and more products to address threats that we are creating. And that's never going to square. That's never going to, weigh even, because improving security cannot come from deploying more technology, training people, whatever it is, because progress can only come from actually empathizing with the people who are using the technology and whose decisions are being made that jeopardize the companies they're working for, their careers, their information, but they're being made for choices. And we need to empathize and we need to try and understand why those things are being happened. And apparently my camera is off. That's terrible. Can you see me now? I'm so sorry. I thought you could see me. Hi, everyone. Thank you for telling me, person. So hi, everyone. Sorry about that. Clearly, Murphy and me. Yay! Hi, Heather. Thank you. So, empathy, which, given what I work with, which is security, can absolutely sound like heresy. Because if you speak to a lot of my colleagues and a lot of my teammates, you would think that there is supposed to be universal acceptance of the need for better email hygiene, prompt patching, MFA, validation of inputs, that this must be universally understood, accepted, and, people must be as passionate about these topics as we are. And any kind of other priorities are definitely, from that love, from an evil place, or because they don't care, or because they are deliberately making choices to make themselves insecure. And we know that because we have armor and we have guns in my lovely Space Marine slide. But we haven't actually addressed why those choices are being made. But what we are doing as an industry is we are using shame to try and force people into behaving differently. And we do this by using words like relative and maturity and best practices. And we're trying to draw a line of reasonableness, even though the underlying environments can be completely different. And so we're judging, fish by their ability to fly and birds by their ability to swim. And we're making no efforts, generally speaking, at distinction or highlighting the fact that the fish is excellent at swimming, but a rather crap flyer. And we're not appreciating why that may be the case. Because it's difficult and it's messy and it's hard to put on a dashboard. But if we're looking at it differently, and if we're looking at ourselves as a service and as a supporting function, empathy forces us to acknowledge that clicking, not patching, passwords 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all of those exist for a reason. Now, when I say empathy, I do not mean that we need to agree with why those choices are being made. We don't have to sympathize. We don't even have to like them. I work with a lot of people that I empathize with, but I neither like nor agree with. And that has been true at all of the jobs I have. But I have always done my utmost to empathize with them. Because in empathy, I can at least understand. And looking at security, strong security means that you must have a strive to understand the attacker or where your weaknesses is. Because you have to be one step ahead of where those are. And so you have to have an always learning, ever evolving kind of strive to understand the counter argument. And so our ability as an organization, or your ability to protect your organization, will always be completely asymmetrically balanced against your attackers, because you have to be one step ahead. And so our ability to understand must be better honed than the adversary's ability to attack. And so the best way to protect ourselves is to put ourselves in our adversary's shoes, which is the definition of empathy. And that doesn't mean that it's looking at it as we all have to have a hacker's mindset, because it can also be looking at ourselves and looking at our teammates to see where are we struggling and where do we need help, and not looking at that from what can we put on a dashboard to kind of drive improvement, but what is the context of the decisions we are making, and how can we actually help one another? And that's where security really, really struggles, because who are we showing up with? Who are we showing up as when we are working on this challenge together? And I would say, who do we actually want to be in that fight? Because empathy, as I mentioned earlier, it does not apply, it does not imply that we're agreeing. I'm never going to agree that everything in clear text all the time is going to be a good idea. But I can empathize with how difficult going from clear text to encryption could be. I could empathize with, if you don't have any resources and you have, an ongoing crisis, how hard hearing that could be. I could empathize with lots of challenges around budgets. And by empathizing with those struggles, it can lead me to moderate my own position. And it can lead me to change how I might present the same information in whom I'm speaking to. And if we're looking at conflict resolution, that's how you actually get through a conflict. You can't start a conflict by both sides stubbornly refusing to see the points in the strategy of the other. That in no way, shape, or form means you have to agree. But you have to consider how the other is looking at your own points, what they might value, what their needs are, what their picture and their context is, and put that into a relation. And then look at, what am I asking this other person to do, and how is that going to impact their day-to-day? Because otherwise you're never going to get to collaborative problem solving. No matter how many tools and buzzwords you throw at that particular problem, you're never going to get there. And at this point, if I haven't kind of frightened you away with 3 awkward minutes of silence and then no video, so it was just like an awkward like speaker voice in the background, you're going to be like, well, we can't like hug ourselves and reason ourselves to a better, better code, better development, better secure anything. And absolutely not. You can't. We can't hug our way to change, because security bugs, security issues, security flaws, you can't reason your way with, a security bug. It's a technological reality. You are technically right. You can borrow my amazing drawing with Nike and say that you are also technically correct. But how are we choosing to present that information? And this is where, generally speaking, we're doing it wrong. Because when we find technical problems, technical bugs, we present them like this. And we have a lovely security board. And in app 1, we have 4. App 2, we have 4. App 3, we have 3.5. But in this dashboard, in this lovely chart, we're not actually giving any context to any of this. What have we actually done? Because looking at what we've actually done, we haven't solved anything. Have we? I would argue that we haven't, because if we have a security bug, it can come from any number of places. And I've picked out 3 with my lovely pen here, but I would find it in any one of these. And where is it actually critical? It totally depends on the context of who you're speaking to. And on that dashboard, all right, so we're going to fix all the critical bugs. If we're fixing it and it's a design flaw, the time and effort needed to fix a design flaw is vastly different from a bug in production where you just want to have a Band-Aid. And so if you're looking at it just from a dashboard and just from that particular view, you could wind up saying that this bug is critical. It must be fixed in this next week, where your audience might be sitting there knowing that that's a huge architectural change, and stop listening because you are speaking to them in language that clearly indicates that you don't understand their context. And therefore, who are you to tell them what to do? Now, we can't have anarchy in the streets, or we can, maybe we should. But generally, leaders exist for a reason. And what we can only hope is that that person is able to listen and understand the difference between an architectural flaw and a Band-Aid solution. But in security, generally speaking, what people are looking for is dashboards. We're looking for the security posture. We're looking for, red, green, yellow. We're looking for high, medium, low. We're not looking for context. And why aren't we looking for context? Because security hasn't had the ability to put things into context. What we've taught people to expect from security is the audit, where someone that probably does not look anything like me shows up and they have a long list of questions. And rather than look at why people are doing things, they're going to look at, are you following industry best practice? Are you testing after OWASP top 10? When was your latest compliance? How often do you rotate your keys? How often do you change your passwords? Never mind that NIST says you shouldn't. Are you following these industry best practices? And if not, it's wrong. Context never comes into play. And that is what we have taught people, because when security first kind of came onto the scene, generally it was run by finance. And we are slowly but surely dragging ourselves away from that space, but not fast enough. So what could we be doing better? I would argue that what people should be doing is a less interesting question than why people are making the choices they are. Because a bug or a choice is generally speaking made for a reason. The reason can be terrible. The reason could be, the person has absolutely no ability to make any other changes. They are locked in a box of this is the only thing they can do. No matter how many times you beat on them with all of the dashboards in the world, that is not something a dashboard can fix. That is a larger organizational change. But you can shame them by having it on a dashboard. And we see this a lot when we're talking about things like patching or larger scale changes. because you'll come over with a sweeper and it'll be, all right, we've scanned your environment. We've scanned X number of servers. And we want you to patch these 14 because they have, a critical finding. Never mind that there are 900 more. And why those 14 specifically? Because they showed up in a scanner as high critical. Where the person doing the actual patching, maybe they don't have any type of orchestration, so it needs to be done by hand. If you were asking me what is the larger security problem, I would say the lack of orchestration doesn't fit on a dashboard either. And where the person doing the patching, are we actually understanding how we got into that situation? Oh, sorry. And how we can actually make it better. And I would argue probably not. And this becomes really, really difficult because we have the amazing technically right crown. And security people understand our need for, security. That's why we exist. But it's also natural for us to assume that users, and in this I include, developers, systems administrators, whoever, that they're making some sort of conscious trade-off, that they are deliberately sitting down and being like, you know what? I hate patching. I don't care that it's, a thing. I don't care that it causes a bunch of vulnerabilities and latency and, new functionality never comes out. I am deliberately not doing this. And so they're deliberately making choices to be insecure. And that's just not true. I have never met a person who can tell me in honesty that they are deliberately not working with security and that they're not some sort of, I am, trying to bring the company down or whatever. But that's, that's the slippery slope argument of having an argument based on the 0.1% of the population that are jerks. The prevalence or seriousness or even existence of a major potential impact is lost on most people. And empathy and looking at it in context helps us to partition those problems into categories of root causes, where if we're not looking at those root causes, we run the risk of assuming that people either don't care, and do we want to work with a bunch of people that really just genuinely don't care, or are deliberately trying to sabotage the company. It's one of the two. And I know how I would feel if I was struggling with a really difficult problem, and rather than try and help me or see me with kindness, the people around me thought that I was just bad at my job. And if that was my feeling, I don't know if I'd want to work with those people. Because if I'm struggling, I could be struggling for any number of reasons. But it's not because I don't care. There's generally always some underlying cause. And we're, rather than looking for this is the way you should be doing things, let's extend the conversation. Because most functions can be implemented in an insecure way. And that can be from a lack of security understanding. It could be from an overprevalence of shortcuts because the area can be so resource poor that, you have to take consistent kind of shortcuts and root hacks and, kind of getting around problems because the amount of time pressure versus deadline is so intense that nothing else can be done. It could be because the state has such a huge technological, gap or debt that this is the Frankenstein's monster of just putting things on top of things on top of things on top of things because, build fast and break things, which is my least favorite buzzword of them all. But all of these sound like great ideas, and all of these sound like hard to implement because the argument that comes back, and I have made this argument before, is that that's not what the investors and the stakeholders and the leadership want to hear. They want a dashboard. They want something quick. And empathy doesn't fit on a dashboard. And the pause is deliberate because it doesn't fit on the dashboard as long as security remains a one-way conversation and as long as security posture remains a one-way conversation. Because what that's saying is it's driving kind of a us versus them mentality. It's the red, orange, yellow, it's entrepreneurship, it's the ego-driven kind of here we are, and we are going to shame these people into doing the right thing. And it does work as long as you don't care about commitment and engagement among your employees. Because what you're going to see is a larger gap between the people doing the work and the people that are looking at kind of these dashboards or that are ordering these dashboards. Because these dashboards don't actually talk about the commitment or the engagement of the people. It doesn't talk about how those numbers got there. And it drives conversations that are intended to drive change using shame as a whip. Because having 14 critical vulnerabilities sounds really bad. But how long have they been there is a far more interesting conversation. And why are they there is a critical conversation, but neither one of those will be covered in 14 critical vulnerabilities. They'll be covered in the appendix slides or in the technical detail. And I would argue that that is the problem, because we are trying to solve a people challenge with a bullet point. And you cannot, absolutely cannot, solve a person problem by boiling them down to a bullet point. You can't. But that doesn't kind of solve the management challenge, because they need to have something to look at. And you can't say, all right, well, read these 80 pages, work at the company for 90 years so you understand the context of every decision. That's not reasonable either. I wish it were, but it's not. What can we do differently? Lots of things. But I would say one of the key things that we really need to start doing is looking at it from an accountability perspective. Security is great at holding other people accountable for their decisions and the impacts of those decisions, and forcing a conversation around who owns those decisions. All good things, all important things. But security is not as good at holding ourselves accountable. And this is one of our key struggles, because we are not allowing other people to hold us accountable by having a dashboard of high, medium, and low on security bugs, security risks, security flaws, how many proactive controls have we implemented? I mean, add any buzzword you like. But if security's position is to help an organization mature and secure its products and services, and I would argue unbelievably strongly that it is, we must be held accountable for how well we are performing those tasks. And currently, generally speaking, in my experience, we're not. And so what would that actually look like, you're wondering? Well, I would say that when you're speaking to security, you are looking to reach an agreement, and having dashboards that reflect agreements and how well people are holding to agreements is a good thing. But look at what product management does. NPS scores are critical. How many times have you asked for security? How satisfied are you with your security help that you've received? How well is it actually living up to what you're looking for? How often do security tools break your builds? How often do they make things slower? How often are they in the way? I would argue that all of those metrics are just as important. Because if we are in the way, if we are making things slower, and if we are trying to use shame to drive a conversation, we are taking ourselves away from it, which is the problem, which is the people around us. Now, I am not arguing that never patching, never solving any bugs is okay. I don't agree with that statement, but I would say that if I am unable to explain why those things are important, that's on me. But I must assume that the people around me are competent, and that the decisions they are making are the best they can with the information that they have. And if I assume that to be true, those are problems that I can solve. I can provide better education. I can provide support for better resourcing. I can provide security architects. I can provide developers. I can help them champion those efforts. Or I can provide better dashboards. But I have to be willing to inspire people to achieve individual successes and overall successes by painting where we want to be going. And I have to define that in a way that people actually want to get involved and passionately pursue. Because having something where, you have to do this checkbox, you have to do this, security tooling, fine. People, especially in these times, they need to keep their jobs to feel, safe and pay their bills, feed their families. I understand that. but that type of engagement is also going to have the quality of the cognitive dissonance of doing things that we don't really want to do. So sure, they'll be doing it, but they'll be doing it, and looking at the technological estate of a lot of places, you see a lot of when it comes to security, because it's being driven from shame. Now, I love the story of Sisyphus. And I love the story of Sisyphus for a number of reasons, but mostly because you have to imagine Sisyphus is happy. And you have to do that because we have to, for a minute, let go of the larger picture. Because if we only focus on the larger picture, the absurdity of rolling a ball or rolling a boulder up a hill for the rest of eternity, forever and ever, every single day, alone, it's crushing. But if we look at it instead from a purpose, and the purpose of Sisyphus, his purpose in that story becomes to push the boulder up the hill, always, constantly, relentlessly. If he in that moment can be happy, pushing a boulder up a hill, doing his best every day in a task that for, a lot of us would be crushing, seen from the larger picture. What a benefit that would be, and what a joy. Because the problem with security is that the internet was not built by security engineers, security architects, the best developers, the best architects. It was built by enthusiasts. And security issues are, generally speaking, large and widespread, and can take more effort than any company will ever put forth to solve them. And so if we look at security from the larger picture, it becomes very emo very quickly. But if we change that perspective and let go of the technological for a little bit, just for a little bit, and look at it instead from our job is to build kind of the bumpers for other people's dreams and to build a platform for other people to create on, then our effort in order to build that platform becomes well worth it. And that becomes a challenge that I know I would love to accept, and I do accept, and I know a lot of people do. And so my goal of this talk is to kind of, in a small way, highlight that there is no way to automate, and trust me, I've looked, security into a pipeline, or automate it into a development cycle, or automate it into a dashboard. It is a person problem where the solution can only be found in breaking it down into the human elements that are around it. And that is challenging, and it is difficult, and there are a lot of days that I spend a lot of time screaming into a pillow. But it is a challenge worth taking. Now, I appreciate all of your time, and I realize that this talk went a little short, but that's just the way it is. I appreciate all of you listening. Welcome to my home. And I know that these times are super challenging. And I just want to say that I appreciate all of you, especially Heather, who and everybody else at the NDC conference. And I wish you all the very best. And if you have any questions, then I will be hanging around on Slack and or here. And if not, then I wish you all the very best. Bye.